After 16 years of watching the Bitcoin network operate, we know that it's meaningfully decentralized. We know that it's resisted control and capture from large companies and forces. We know that its monetary policy is credible at this point and that it's not going to change. These other crypto networks may have other properties, but they certainly don't have these properties that Bitcoin has. Or there should be a meaningful difference, and the industry should recognize that difference. Hey, everybody, this episode of Supply Shock is powered by Core. You're going to hear a lot more about them later in this episode, but first, a word from our sponsors.
Core is the Bitcoin consumer chain. Stake your Bitcoin, explore Bitcoin DeFi, and earn rewards today. Visit stake.coredao.org/blockworks. You'll hear more about them later in the episode.
Crypto's premier institutional conference is coming to New York City, March 18th to the 20th. That's right, I'm talking about Digital Asset Summit, presented by Blockworks. Of course, I'll be there bringing a Bitcoin maximalist perspective to a number of talks and panels where I'll be discussing why Bitcoin might be headed to $1 million. And, well, the rest of the digital asset market just might be trending to zero. Get your tickets online today. They're selling fast. Hey everybody, welcome to Supply Shock. I'm your host, Pete Rizzo, the Bitcoin historian on X. Billionaires are buying Bitcoin. They're going long. El Salvador's president battling with the IMF and a strategic Bitcoin reserve in the US. Is it happening? Welcome to Supply Shock. We've got a talented group of commentators today. You know and love them from Roxham TV, Nolan Bowerly, and also Michael McSweeney, managing editor of Blockworks. Welcome to the program, guys.
Thanks for having us.
The big topic of the day. I assume you guys didn't get your invites in the mail to the White House for this historic gathering coming up this week where President Donald Trump, according to Howard Lutnick, will be announcing plans for a strategic Bitcoin reserve, maybe with other assets. Let's wind it back. Where were you both when the Donald's tweet, his Truth Social post hit and the strategic crypto reserve was in play? I was on a long drive myself. I was without cell service, and I awoke to a new world where the U.S. government is now a portfolio owner, or could be a portfolio owner of multiple cryptocurrencies. Nolan, where were you when the bomb hit?
I was actually having an argument about whether or not Trump had said strategic Bitcoin reserve or a stockpile, because I was being educated that at Bitcoin 2024 in Nashville, he never said strategic reserve. He only said stockpile, and that we had hallucinated all of this stuff. So as the argument was going, I was like, let me check that.
Works, right? Like someone says something and you just kind
of hallucinate. A lot of hallucinating going on. Many hallucinators. So it was so conveniently timed, because I actually went to my phone. You know how people do, like look at my proof. I'm going to look it up, and I looked it up, and it had hit, and I was like, oh, it's definitely happening. What are you talking about? So it was a real-time delivery of an argument win for me. So I got to thank President Trump for his timing that day.
Personally, not surprised. I think the Trump administration has been signaling broad support for the crypto industry. Of course, as a Bitcoin-only person, I'm more assuaged by Howard Lutnick's comments today, talking about how there is a division or should be a division between Bitcoin and other crypto assets. I mean, personally, I think it's wild to think that, we're equating Bitcoin, which is a asset backed by energy that everybody has kind of fairly accessed, with, coins where, the ownerships are owned by, 60-70% of the supply is owned by sort of the founders and issuers. But I know, Michael McSweeney, you're not as ethically concerned about those things. What was your take on the Trump stockpile or the reserve?
I'm not sure what you mean by that comment, but I'll just breeze past it. I mean, I think, I think this stuff was expected. I think the language keeps shifting between stockpile or reserve and back again. So I'm sort of not counting my bit chickens here until we actually see something that either carries the force of law or maybe like an executive order / White House press release that reveals how this thing will function, right? I think, as is often the case with Trump, when he's getting into what he calls the weave, the exact meaning of words, I mean, it can shift from day to hour to minute. So,
but I'm asking you, this is all procedural. I'm asking you as a voter, did you vote for this? Did you vote for the U.S. government to own XRP? Do you, Michael McSweeney, managing editor of Blockworks, do you want the U.S. government to own XRP? Should we buy XRP?
I think it's fascinating that the U.S. government may take the crypto holdings that it has and do something more official with it. I mean, the U.S. government currently holds billions of dollars of Bitcoin. I know that during the election, probably the most interesting thing that Trump said was, we're going to stop selling the Bitcoin that we have. So I expect that there will be some formalization of that campaign promise this weekend at the summit. I would expect that's probably going to be the big thing that gets announced. Maybe, some early work into what a strategic stockpile or reserve, to the extent that these words mean anything, when this stuff goes down this weekend. So I'm very curious about the details.
Such an impartial observer. Nolan, you gotta give me something. What was your reaction? Are you okay with America owning ADA, XRP, Sol?
No. Of course, but you gotta bring in exactly what Michael McSweeney was talking about here: the weave, right? Trump's persuasion technique, the way he operates, the way he functions, the way he brings attention to issues. What we saw right away when he mentioned this suite of coins and all that stuff is it erupted into a debate online again, where Bitcoin was contrasted with every other asset. You had people like Naval come in and say this should not be exit liquidity for anyone else. You saw the debate again with Bitcoin and contrast. Contrast persuades more than anything, and no one knows how to use contrast better than Trump to move the needle. Just look at the Greenland, Panama, and Canada thing, right? When he said Greenland, you're like, oh God, that's so stupid. But then you add Panama, and then you add Canada, and then suddenly Greenland gets new meaning when contrasted with these other annexations. Suddenly your mind ends up going, well, Greenland is sort of it's not a stupid idea. That one could happen, but this other one is really dumb, right? So when you see him talk about all these coins, he has a major persuasion job on his hands anyway. He made a lot of promises. I think he understands that Bitcoiners had a lot to do with his election, that this tech bro situation that he's got, this relationship that he's got with the tech bros, the coalition he's built with Maha, this is vital for him to preserve, but he's also got to make sure that the American worker comes first, the tariffs work for Americans, that he's not just selling people out to Wall Street again. So he's gone out there, he's created this contrast, created this huge debate, and we all know from the art of the deal how this stuff operates. He goes way overboard, and then in the end, you fall back on kind of what you want.
But I want to press our good friend Michael here, because I want to, as the editor of Blockworks, this is a crypto agnostic publication, open to Bitcoiners like us, but also to the crypto people. Isn't there a difference? Shouldn't the U.S. government recognize a difference, and that is correct and right? Is that your view?
Well, I mean, if you think about other things that the U.S. stockpile should.
This is just between Bitcoin and crypto. Is your view that the U.S. should have a neutral position and treat Bitcoin the same as other crypto assets?
You mean we can't talk about the cheese stockpile right now? I was really going to
throwing out.
I'm just saying. I mean, if the so your question is, should the government officially
doesn't the government have to recognize that there is a difference between Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, or do you disagree with that?
Well, does your question reveal this notion that the government should be supporting one's bag over another, or should the U.S. government just be holding?
Do you agree that our enlightened world of 2025, we've known each other since 2013, 2014, we were playing around with these coins, we were, your mining rigs were talking on fire, that we've progressed to a stage of enlightenment as a society that we can say Bitcoin is categorically different from these other crypto assets, even if we maybe disagree about where they're going? Can we at least agree that these are peas and carrots? These are Vita Vita vitamins and regular vitamins. These are two different things. Agree or disagree?
I think for the purposes of something that the U.S. government might do, I honestly don't see the difference. Again, I think that the vector for how the government is going to acquire these things is mostly going to be through like criminal seizures. And I think that the stockpile is mostly going to be these coins that they seize. I think that it's much more politically risky for the government to go out there on the open market and just start executing buys on Coinbase or something. I guess perhaps I'm not entirely sure where your question is going.
These are different types of networks, right? These are categorically different networks, right? Am I correct in saying that the XRP software was developed by, whatever legal courts say, was developed by a corporation, that corporation holds a controlling interest in the supply of this asset, and that because of that issuance relationship, there's a categorical difference between that software network, the cryptographic software network, this network where your private keys can be recognized as money, and Bitcoin, where that relationship doesn't exist to any sort of central issue or arbitrator.
I guess the way to answer your question would be like, what's the purpose of the stockpile? I mean, the government stockpiles oil in order to have a supply of oil in time of war and also to influence the market for oil during strategic moments. Like, what's the point of the stockpile? And I don't think anyone's really answered that question apart from the government should hodl because the price should go up.
No,
Then
you
at
can
what
answer
point
it.
does-
You can answer it
Okay.
because of the because we're dealing with proof of work versus proof of stake. Essentially, we're also dealing with the same contrast between blue collar and Wall Street, right? We understand. I think we all understand here that the Wall Street financial engineers aren't exactly the most productive people in our society. These are not people that need to be favored in the next iteration. In the next iteration of the U.S. system, the U.S. dollar, how we prioritize jobs, right? We know that the best and brightest go to the best paying jobs in the world all the time. That's a normal thing, right? Whatever the best paying job is, the best and brightest are going to go to it. We've got 60 years now of the best and brightest going into Wall Street in order to do financial engineering. And it's caused a lot of what we call the Cantillon effect, the haves and the have-nots, the 1%. We cannot have another bank bailout 2008 credit default swap thing where a bunch of banky whatevers are getting a benefit. Now, that's where the contrast with Bitcoin comes, because it's the only one of these that has blue collar job connections, right? When it comes to the actual people running the mines, these companies that have balance sheets that then have to go out and hire these risk managers. Marathon's got to hire these risk managers. Bitfarms has got to hire these risk managers. All these large miners have to do this. At the same time, Bitcoin is plugging itself into the grid. Bitcoin is plugging itself into the Texan grid. It's plugging itself into all these different areas where you're mining. And there is a component that separates it. There is a component here where the blue collar folks are connected to Bitcoin in a way that the other coins don't have this connection.
HODLing isn't enough anymore. Bitcoin is evolving on Core, unlocking yield, utility, and a thriving DeFi ecosystem. With over 250 dApps and nearly $1 billion in total value locked, Bitcoin DeFi is growing fast. Hundreds of thousands of users are already staking, lending, and building on Core's high-speed, low-fee rails. Now it's your turn. Whether you're a user or a builder, the Core Ignition program rewards you for participating in Bitcoin's next evolution. Unlock your Bitcoin and use Core. Start earning with Ignition today at ignition.coredao.org/blockworks. For the past decade, Ledger has been the global leader in digital asset security, trusted to secure more than 20% of the world's crypto assets. Celebrating 10 years of innovation, Ledger is making digital ownership more secure and accessible with their latest products, Ledger Stacks and Ledger Flex. These wallets feature the world's first secure touchscreens, simplifying your digital transactions while ensuring uncompromising security through Ledger's secure chip and proprietary OS. Plus, with the Ledger Security Key app, you can say goodbye to traditional passwords and step up your digital protection. Ready to protect your assets? Choose the most trusted name in hardware wallets, Ledger, and take control of your digital security today at ledger.com. Unlock the power of your Bitcoin with Ledn. For over 6 years, Ledn has helped thousands hodl their Bitcoin while accessing liquidity, focusing on transparency, security, and trust. Learn what your Bitcoin can do for you and see why so many clients trust Ledn. Visit ledn.io to learn more.
Well, I think what I'm hinting at and I'm trying to press on is that I think that the crypto industry's normative view is that there is no difference between Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, and I think that's wrong. I think there's an actual there is an answer.
I think you are correct in that. Yeah, I mean, maybe this is a cynical take, but I suspect that the reason that these cryptocurrencies were mentioned is because that there is Trump family exposure to them, and I think it's pretty much as simple as that. So in the end,
you as the steward of knowledge in society, you're an editor of an illustrious publication. I'm asking you do you acknowledge a difference between Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, or do you think they are the same thing after being in this industry for 10 years?
I think if I were to be appointed the commissar of the U.S. Bitcoin Reserve, I would probably only buy Bitcoin. Is that what you want me to
There
say?
we go.
I think I would. I think I would only buy Bitcoin.
10 minutes. It took 10 minutes to get that answer.
But again, I think that the gap here is like, what is the precise purpose of this stockpile? Like, I understand that there are ways that you can create a purpose for it, but has Trump, the U.S. government said, again, comparing it to like an oil stockpile, like what is the purpose of this? What will these funds be used for? At what point will, again, like with oil, like will this reserve be used to influence the market?
Well, then I think we talked about this last week with the argument about the national debt and that, Bitcoin can help offset those costs, that we know this is a strategically important asset. If we don't buy it, China's going to buy it. The UAE is going to buy it. Is that not correct? I mean, do you not think that it's a strategic necessity for us to benefit from this new financial network?
But what if the government needed to issue NFTs on Cardano? Then maybe having a native stockpile would be more useful at that point.
Right, but
Just
these are,
throwing it
you would
out there.
argue that there is a categorical difference, and that the U.S. government currently has no need to
If the
issue
U.S.
NFTs.
government needed to do an ICO on Ethereum, then they would want to have that Ethereum stockpile at that point.
Right. Nolan, what's your rebuttal here?
Again, I'll go back to the energy argument. I'll go back to energy is the economy. There's a clear policy objective of the Trump administration to be the greatest energy producer in the world. At the same time, America's completely changing its calibration when it comes to tariffs, when it comes to how foreign governments could continue to buy our debt. We call it the Triffin dilemma. Of course, this has been mentioned many times about how other countries have been interested in our own debt. That's caused this massive demand for US dollar
Yeah,
debt.
I think this is the thing, is we need to get out of this monetary system that we're operating, that we can't continue to operate. And Bitcoin is the only neutral platform, credibly neutral cryptocurrency platform. We're going to talk about it in a second. Lightspeed Blockworks newsletter, Solana considering monetary policy change. There's not going to be a serious amount of government investment in a technology stack and a network where they're valuating the inflation, and some coders are making some decision about how much Solana is going to be produced. Like, don't we agree that Bitcoin is credibly neutral after you watching the fork wars and the upgrades? Has Bitcoin proven its neutrality, and haven't these other cryptocurrencies, aren't they at best suspect?
Why does Bitcoin need to be proven for the U.S. government? Why does Bitcoin need the government?
Such a dodge.
It's not.
Well,
I don't think
monetary
Bitcoin
thing.
needs the government. I think the government will need Bitcoin. I think if the government is going to find a new way to take control, let's say, of interest rates, right? Because if the only buyer for T-bills is the Federal Reserve, which is looking like it's going to be the case, the Federal Reserve is going to continue to have control over the interest rates. The overnight lending rate will continue to be the benchmark for the economy. It'll continue to create the relationship between the commercial banks, and the Federal Reserve will be the genesis block, if you will, of the US dollar. That's not what's in the Constitution. That's not what's going to happen. It looks like from here on out, it looks like Treasury is going to be back in control. And there's only one way for Treasury to regain control of the financial system, ergo take over the interest rate, and that will be to create a new debt instrument where Bitcoin is involved. This will create this sort of bimetallism that, although we didn't air last week's episode, let's just get everyone back up to speed. We had a long conversation about bimetallism and what it offers to Americans, and that we could be entering into a
reasonably long, yeah.
A reasonably long.
Appropriately long.
Wasn't long enough. Wasn't long enough.
Yeah. But we could be entering a period now where the US dollar goes back to what it was functionally created to do, that is policy, or what it said it was going to do, fiat, right? Government declarations, government policy turns itself into actual policy dollars. Other people call it food stamps. And the Bitcoin is there to save.
Is that our friend Michael here doesn't appreciate that the U.S. financial system. You think it's going to continue forever, right? Like, is that your operating assumption?
Do I think that the U.S. financial system or the dollar will last forever? No, I don't. Yeah. I mean, the history of the world has proven that.
So what's your plan B if it's not to stockpile Bitcoin?
What's my plan B if the dollar ceases to be the world reserve currency? I don't know, buy a gun at that point.
But we also got to remember, Michael McSweeney does have an important job, and we do need impartial people in the media that do this stuff. So that he's maintained this impartiality is important.
No,
you have to keep asking questions, right?
I do think that Bitcoin is meaningfully different from cryptocurrency. The cryptocurrencies writ large.
I don't disagree.
And I do think that it's time, because this is how you get to these conversations where Trump is just throwing all these things in the grab bag, like he's picking candy and putting it in his trick-or-treat bag. You get it because he doesn't seem to functionally understand the difference between Bitcoin and Ethereum and Solana. And I think it's time for the crypto industry to recognize that Bitcoin is meaningfully different. I understand there are old tribal divergencies. I understand why certain exchanges want to make investments in the Ethereum network, and they are hopeful and optimistic about Solana. But I do think that after 16 years of watching the Bitcoin network operate, we know that it's meaningfully decentralized. We know that it's resisted control and capture from large companies and forces. We know that its monetary policy is credible at this point, and that it's not going to change. And that, when you're interfacing the system, when you end up with a Bitcoin private key, there's no person or process that can ever separate you from being able to to execute that private key and send that money to another person. And that's meaningfully different than these other things like the Solana governance proposal, where they're talking about the inflation schedule and giving more money to certain network operators. These are just two different types of things. And I think it's a disingenuous to not be able to make rational scientific observations about, Bitcoin has these properties. These other crypto networks may have other properties, but they certainly don't have these properties that Bitcoin has. And I think, this is part of the negative Bitcoin reaction when you see this strategic crypto reserve, is that I think there should be no difference at this point, or there should be a meaningful difference, and the industry should recognize that difference. I was heartened to see Brian Armstrong come out and make that point. Naval Ravikant make that point. I mean, these were people who were deep in the trenches in terms of, cryptocurrencies in 2017, launching a lot of different types of these networks. I appreciate them acknowledging it, but I guess my question to you, Michael, is that do you think they're just bowing to political pressures, and do you actually just not agree that these things are different? Because I think we should be able to move forward, and we have to be able to admit that these things are different. They have different properties.
Well, I think that the crypto industry can want one thing, but ultimately this will boil down to what Trump and his administration want to do. And I think that it really is important to acknowledge that I think that I think there is a massive conflict of interest underlying everything he does on the Bitcoin or crypto front. And I think that it would be willfully ignorant to take the view that like what is playing out here is not connected to the financial interests of the Trump family. I mean, that's just sort of
let's
how
just say there's precedent here. Let's just say like you want to maintain neutrality and impartiality. Other countries have taken stances on Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. The stance of El Salvador, we're going to talk about their relationship with the IMF, is that Bitcoin is meaningfully different than other cryptocurrencies. Would you agree with that?
I would, and I already said that.
Okay, so do you think the United States should deviate from that approach and broadly back and support all these networks as if they're equal?
I mean, again, this is where I get stuck in the purpose of the stockpile.
You're
And,
just
like,
on
what
the
I would like to
cheese. You
see.
just want some of the cheese. Like, you want to know what cheese is in there.
I'd like to know what they're going to do with the cheese, which again, I think that the lack of attention to that detail has created the conditions for maybe some of the frustration or lofty thinking of those in Coinland saying, oh, well, what will happen here? What's the long-term plan for this stockpile? Why are they doing it? Why have they chosen this coin? Why aren't they choosing my coin, et cetera, et cetera? And I think it's actually fueling some of that tribalism. I know that when Trump made his comments that weekend, some people were quite upset that he didn't mention Bitcoin first.
I mean, he didn't mention Fartcoin. I mean,
That's
I thought
true.
that was telling. It was really telling. I mean, how it arises, right? I mean, that's just a fact, right?
So I'm waiting to see details. I'm curious how his administration will turn the weave into something functional, whether that will actually pass muster. Gotta wait and see.
But don't we need and want this story as industry participants? Does the U.S. government have to be successful here? Don't we want this U.S. government effort to be successful, Nolan?
I think so. I think it's obvious that, and I do think my prediction is you are going to see something like a bit bond, which will bring understanding and perspective to the strategic reserve. If they can raise more money, if they can issue a new bond to fund this government, if they can get people interested in funding the US government and in believing in it again, you're going to have to use something creative. And the only way to issue a bit bond and put some certain guarantees into it is if the country's also willing to hold it, because willing to hold it means that selling it brings some degree of credibility. So they work hand in hand. I believe that the trajectory, the pathway forward for Treasury to take control again, as the Constitution underlined, to be a constitutional republic again, goes through this system, right? I don't know what we are now, but something else arose, something else grew. America turned into something completely different over these years. The Federal Reserve was not predicted. Most of these institutions that helped the U.S. government function were not predicted. They were not written into the Constitution. Something grew out of the World War II victory that was just never shut off. We just continued to be the same machine that won that war. We never shut any of it down, and it looks like that machine is exhausted. That's why you see pieces of it breaking all the time. Now, as it's breaking, we're trying to rebuild something else on the fly. We're literally trying to re-engineer an airplane in the air. It's not easy. It's not simple. But
I think we just have to accept that Trump has a historic opportunity here to transition the United States away from a failing system, and that he might be an imperfect vessel for this transition. McSweeney, I mean, can you accept that Trump is in the right place at the right time. He has a historic opportunity here that he can change the course of America. Don't you want to root for Donald Trump?
Trying to think of how to respond to that. I think that there is, and this is again my personal opinion, not the opinion of Blockworks or Blockworks News. I think there's a very large gap between the lofty hopes of what someone in Trump's position and how they execute power, what that could turn into, and what will likely play out based on the historic incentives and actions of Trump and those who he chooses to keep around him. I think ultimately it would be nice if these actions do usher in like a new age for the Bitcoin and crypto industry. But I personally do think that there are some, and maybe this isn't the venue of this conversation, some troubling implications of the American crypto industry becoming a special interest. I think that there are.
Well, I mean, that's already, that ship has sailed.
I think that decision, I agree with you. I think that decision has been made, but I think it's fair to ask. So if the crypto industry has chosen to become a special interest, it has chosen to participate in politics, at that point, you are no longer allowed to stop participating, to stop paying money. What happens when you want to stop paying money? Then do those conditions change for you? And so, and I wonder in the long term if that is either a healthy or a very dangerous thing.
Well, I mean, look, Dennis Porter was on the Supply Shock podcast this week. He was talking about just like how large of a spender, the crypto industry is. And it's, it's not only did we outspend everybody in this election, but it's, if you go back for multiple elections. But I think that was a product of the persecution of the industry under the Biden administration, right? I do think that, if you ask the question, okay, like, how much lobbying is done by the internet lobby these days versus in the 90s, right? In the 90s, there was a reason for the Clinton administration, to adopt progressive policy for the internet. There was, lobbying against the different telecommunications giants of the day in terms of, who were holding back, the internet providers from experimenting, with this network, with this new technology. So, I mean, can't we acknowledge that there's shifts? Like maybe now it is the time to engage, right? And then maybe in the long term, it's like, does the radio industry still have a large interest in American politics, right? I don't think you hear about the, network television industry having a large, but there was probably an era where, they were dominant. They did need a change, right? So I think is your worry here that this lobbying will continue forever? I mean, I think with the cryptocurrencies, outside of Bitcoin, there is that risk, because I do think that, they certainly have the money, right, to keep advocating for their own interests. And, as we see with people like Dave Portnoy and others, there's no limit to the, people creating new currencies. So troubling stuff in some regards. Nolan, your thoughts, the industry lobbying?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a hot potato, right? In the sense that if you think you can control Bitcoin, as many people have, then you might be underestimating the actual power that's going on here. So I think a lot of Bitcoiners don't mind throwing it to government and saying, deal with it. Let's see if you can integrate it into the whole. But I remember the end of the movie, The Matrix, and that's what it makes me think of, when the agent and he's there and he absorbs them into it, and then he choke on the bone. And that's what I see. So indeed, we could have to continue to fund this thing for now, but it's a choke on the bone situation. It's be careful what you take from us as an industry, because it might just swallow you whole. And that's how I see Bitcoin ultimately. I mean, we've talked about this a million times, separating money and state. Separating money and state looks a lot like the end of the movie, The Matrix. I hate Matrix analogies. Usually when you're making a Matrix analogy, you're kind of lost, because everybody does them, and it's kind of, it's diluted, let's say, right? It's very crypto.
This one especially.
I mean, this one especially. But the choke on the bone thing, to me, is a sign of what could happen. So indeed, Trump taking it, absorbing it into the whole of the American system might seem like he's in the driver's seat today, but these things have a mind of their own and an ability to.
I mean, ultimately, as like an Alex Gladstein would say, that he's choosing to propagate a network in which people can't be stripped of their autonomy or access to Bitcoin. And while there certainly are terrible things a single government could do to try to stop Bitcoin. And we saw the Biden administration try to do that, right? Try to track wallets, like have people register self-custody wallets. Bitcoin would survive that. I mean, Bitcoin doesn't need, the government intervention. I think some of these other cryptocurrencies do, because I think that, in some cases, what they're doing is predatory, right? They are marketing and giving information to the market that is at best, they're experimental technologies. I mean, that's how I personally view the space. As I say, there's Bitcoin, and then there's a lot of experiments. And look, I'm not one who's going to shut down experimentation. There was probably a good reason to create 30 or 40 other airplanes that didn't fly after the Wright brothers plane. You want to know the total space of the science, but don't you think it's alarming? Like, can't we sit here as people, being in this industry for 12 years, the government's making these considerations of like, how many of these products do you actually use within your lives? Like, I own and save in Bitcoin. I'm not using Ethereum. I don't use Solana. I work in this industry. I don't use Solana. Like, what do I
use stable? I'm a big stablecoin.
Okay, yeah. You use stable, but McSweeney, you don't use anything, right? So like, we don't even use this stuff, right? Like, I mean,
but those are our choices that we make. I mean,
but like, if
to only
something
you
is
and I.
broadly useful, don't you think you would have used it at some point? Like, I mean, wouldn't you have
Maybe,
used
but I think that my lived experience is different from someone who might say use stablecoins a lot, or may choose to attempt to build a business on a network that's not Bitcoin. I would also dial back 30 seconds and say that the industry, namely exchanges and VC interest, did pay for a government intervention that was this election and the outcome from there. So, like, that relationship is irrevocable. A government intervention was bought, and now we must wait and see, will that be good in the long term?
The only thing better than stacking sats is staking them. With Core's self-custodial Bitcoin staking, you can earn yield on your BTC without ever giving up custody, no new trust assumptions, no counterparties, and no slashing risk. Still your keys, still your coins, now your yield. Here's how it works. Lock your Bitcoin on the Bitcoin network. Help elect a Core validator and start earning Core rewards, passively, securely, and without risk to your principal. And with dual staking, you can boost rewards by staking Core tokens alongside your Bitcoin. Institutions can also tap into Bitcoin at scale with top custodians. Don't let your Bitcoin sit idle, put it to work. Visit stake.core.dao/blockworks to start staking today. For the past decade, Ledger has been the global leader in digital asset security, trusted to secure more than 20% of the world's crypto assets. Celebrating 10 years of innovation, Ledger is making digital ownership more secure and accessible with their latest products, Ledger Stacks and Ledger Flex. These wallets feature the world's first secure touchscreens, simplifying your digital transactions while ensuring uncompromising security through Ledger's secure chip and proprietary OS. Plus, with the Ledger Security Key app, you can say goodbye to traditional passwords and step up your digital protection. Ready to protect your assets? Choose the most trusted name in hardware wallets, Ledger, and take control of your digital security today at ledger.com. If you've been around Bitcoin for long enough, you've heard the term HODL and the name Ledn. Ledn has been the go-to specialist in Bitcoin lending for over 6 years. Ledn helps you unlock the liquidity of your BTC, allowing you to HODL while still accessing the wealth of your Bitcoin. Ledn has been battle-tested with a focus on transparency, security, and trust. This has allowed them to build a proven track record of client success and security, helping tens of thousands of clients harness the value of their digital assets with confidence and peace of mind. Learn for yourself why so many clients trust Ledn by checking out Ledn's Trustpilot or their reviews on social media. And to learn more about what your Bitcoin can do for you, check out ledn.io.
Okay, let's zoom out. Let's go to Bukele versus the IMF. Let's get back to the global stage. The International Monetary Fund this week issuing a large report in which it outlined its various demands for the small Latin American nation of El Salvador, saying that in order to accept this $1.4 billion loan to help kind of grow and restructure the company, they had to stop mining Bitcoin. They have to stop buying Bitcoin. And then President Bukele yesterday saying, no, it's not stopping. We're going to keep buying Bitcoin, even though we've taken the loan. We've received these orders. We're not responding. We're going rogue. I mean, this is a massive international dispute in which Bitcoin is the focal point. I mean, this nation, the leader of this nation, is saying, we are going to reject these demands. These demands are unfair. We as a nation need to stockpile Bitcoin in order to be successful economically in the future. This is a David and Goliath situation. Nolan, your view on President Bukele? What's going on here? What's the calculus? What's at stake?
So I saw Max Kaiser release, or he just tweeted one picture, and it was the famous c'est pas une pipe. This is not a pipe, the famous painting, right? The Magritte, I think, René Magritte painting. So a little bit of a psychological reference there about hallucinations, let's say, manipulation. I know Bukele, so I mentioned this because just before Max and Stacy went on stage at Bitcoin 2024, just before President Trump was there, I had a conversation with them, and I said, it looks like negging. It looks like Trump is negging Bukele. It looks like we're at the beginning of a bromance, and Trump is doing his flirtation thing with Bukele to get his attention and start creating this relationship. And what I saw from the beginning of this anyway is you look at Trump's cuts to U.S. aid, right? Bukele was the beginning of that. Bukele was the first person to say, hey, there's some information laundering going on here. This is some dangerous information laundering. And from there, you start to see what happened, right? IMF made these declarations this week. Well, at the same time, the United States is the largest contributor to the IMF. At the same time, you saw Tether coming into the El Salvador situation. Tether being one of the biggest backers now of these T-bills. They're one of the biggest buyers going. When I said that there's no market for T-bills, well, that's if you don't count Tether. They're like the 16th largest holder now. They hold more than El Salvador and most countries. I think they hold as much as Germany or something ridiculous like that. Maybe I'm wrong a little bit on the numbers, but there's something we're not seeing here. There's some part of this story, whether it was the forced privatization of some businesses so that more balance sheet companies can get there. I don't know what's going on, but I know that Tether has a lot of sway in the US administration. They didn't buy any access like others. They bought something a lot more precious. That's just direct stake in the US economy. They have to be listened to. They're as important and powerful a player as the United States, as a lot of countries are. So there's something going on there between Tether, El Salvador, and Trump, and I think we're going to see a lot more of that going forward. It looks like whatever Bukele agreed to was disingenuous at best, and it looks like they have way more latitude than what they wrote in the IMF papers. And I saw Stacey Hebert, of course, Max Kaiser's partner, had something very similar in mind. She says, don't listen to what the proof of stake administrators say. Look at the proof of work. He's buying, buying, buying. So something in there we're not seeing. We don't have all the picture. We don't know everyone's incentives, but something is not what it seems. Something is different than what meets the eye, just like the Max Kaiser, Sisi, and PIP statements.
McSweeney, the IMF, obviously the International Monetary Fund, an influential global organization. Why is it so bad that El Salvador is buying Bitcoin? Why do they need to stop this? What does this show about the Bitcoin program? And we know that people aren't, spending Bitcoin in El Salvador, that there's not the widespread adoption. Why is this such a strategic importance to such a large and powerful organization?
I'm a Nolan on this one. I mean, I think there's an information gap here. I mean, just kind of doing my research before the call, there are press statements from the IMF saying that like staff agreed to all of this. You see this a lot in releases like that. Going back to December, is there a conversation happening in the background? I mean, the U.S. has a pretty strong hand in what the IMF does. Is there something about the relationship between the U.S. and El Salvador here that's like just like not disclosed? I think obviously the U.S. government, especially under Trump, like you can see that their interest in a more active role in South America. I think that's going to be one of the big storylines of the next 3.5 years. Whether this is part of that, I honestly don't know. I mean, I'm not going to claim to be an expert on IMF history, but my understanding is that I don't think that perhaps the Bitcoin element is unique, but telling a government, hey, we're going to loan you money, we're going to create a lending facility, you can't do X, Y, and Z. I feel like that's happened in the past. Maybe Nolan, I don't know if you agree with that or not.
Sure. But why do they care whether the El Salvador government is buying Bitcoin if it's just cheese, like you say? I mean, they're just taking some extra cheese to put it aside.
I mean, I guess if I had to play ill-informed IMF role play here, I would probably say, well, if you need money from us, why are you spending money on Bitcoin? Would maybe be the rationalization. Again, I'm with Nolan. I think there's an information gap here, but let's say I was lending you money to let's use more cheese. But let's say you were running a cheese shop and I was lending you money to improve your cheese shop. But meanwhile, you were spending all this money on like your own personal stash of cheese that you just wanted to have around that was unconnected to your business. I would have questions. Whether that is applicable to this, I don't know, because again, I think with Nolan, there's an information gap here. But I suspect that perhaps there are staffers at the IMF who are raising this question. And those questions being raised are probably reaching the level of a defining characteristic of this agreement. Now, here's what I want to know. So will the IMF say, well, if you want to buy the Bitcoin and so be it, we're not going to create this lending facility for you? What are the impacts on the Salvadorian government? As I understand it, the Salvadorian government requires, maybe I'm wrong about this, but my understanding is that they require this assistance because they have a very high debt to GDP ratio. So I don't know if the ultimate goal is for like the Bitcoin holdings that they have to be used to bring that ratio down. Maybe they are just HODLing. But again, they have this relationship with the IMF. My understanding is that is the nature of it. And I guess it's a question of, does Bukele believe that being defiant here will be the right political play, and that maybe like the U.S. government under Trump will say, "Hey, IMF, you guys should back off here." They very well may do so, and honestly, I would not be surprised if that happened. But again, just got to wait and see.
Yeah, that's where I'm leaning too. I think I saw Gerson Martinez say something along the lines, just picking up on the zeitgeist of Zelensky being in town last Friday, saying maybe the IMF doesn't have the cards, maybe they don't have the cards here, and that could be exactly what it is, right? They can say here, sign here if you want the loan, and then Bukele says, yeah, sure, and get out of here. Thanks for the money, thanks for all the cheese, and peace.
Well, they've been stripped of the legal tender status. So right now in El Salvador, after a 3-year period in which Bitcoin was legal tender, merchants and all the citizens had to accept Bitcoin legally. That's no longer the case. It's now voluntary. The US dollar, legal tender in El Salvador. What's at stake symbolically here for Bitcoin? El Salvador, not the only country, obviously, America entering the conversation, Bhutan, some others. What's at stake for Bitcoin if El Salvador does have to stop buying, if their support does go to zero?
You might know more, but you might know better than me. I mean, what was behind the decision to like remove legal tender status? Was it because people weren't really using
No, that was
it?
an IMF demand. That was an IMF.
And they agreed to that.
That's
So they agreed to that part, but you can't buy Bitcoin for the with public funds.
Well, so that's what we don't know, right? Like we don't know is that they agreed to, again, like I think what's being flouted here by these international monetary organizations is the idea that Bitcoin is some sort of contagion, that like it can't spread. We don't want people using it. We don't want them to know that this technology, can be used as money, because then that reduces their control of the system, right? I mean, I think you get into the fragility of the entirety of the system. And Bitcoin, Anthony Pompliano used to say Bitcoin is a virus, it's spreading. Bitcoin is viral, right? People are using it. There was widespread adoption in El Salvador. The government tried, to accelerate that. Ultimately, they weren't successful. But I mean, per capita, I think the latest surveys say 7 to 8% of the country of El Salvador use Bitcoin. I mean, that's very impressive, right? It's obviously Bitcoin is useful. I mean, people who have wallets, they still own the private keys to those Bitcoin. They can still trade them with other people. I mean, for the IMF, I think to come in and say the 16-year-old technology that people are using every day globally, that the Ukraine has raised war money, in Bitcoin, it just begs the question. It's like, okay, well, why is it so bad? If the American government is talking about buying Bitcoin, why can't El Salvador buy Bitcoin? What is the specific problem here?
It looks like they can't mine it either. I'm just looking at it. I'm looking at it.
And they can't take it as the thing that has me most confused, more or less, is and whether they're going to be a scofflaw about it is just because I'm from Canada. I know a lot of Canadian, let's call them refugees. That's what they are. Canadians who have fled to El Salvador because of the trucker protest and the government crackdown. It's a lot harder to use Bitcoin in Canada, and it's still sort of a Biden war on the industry up there. So a lot of the Bitcoiners have already found themselves in El Salvador. It's a huge contingent of Canadians. You hear people say it all the time. Everywhere you go, you meet these Canadians who have fled. And a lot of them indeed bought their second passport because there was a facility to buy your passport. I saw Trump announce the golden visa this week for some crazy amount of money. But they've had a golden visa for a while now, a Bitcoin visa in El Salvador. And exactly those IMF things that says they can't raise Bitcoin, they can't add to their stockpile, their strategic reserve, using these different facilities. I remember that we used to pay, when you went to El Salvador, you could pay your entry visa with Bitcoin. What happened to that? That was a big Bitcoin income source.
I think this is just a referendum on the paternalism of this old system, right? And I think, like, as someone who is more liberal, kind of left coming perspectives, who's now found myself in the Trump camp, it's sort of like, okay, Bitcoin is a technology, it works, like people are using it. It's like, why have this massive multi-government body coming in and tell some country what they can do about Bitcoin? I mean, it's 2025. Can't we admit that, like, Bitcoin has been around? Like, I've sent payments to Nolan, he sent payments back to me. Like it works, right? And that's part of my question, like hammering you at the beginning of this, is can't we admit Bitcoin and crypto are different things? Because I think there's like a tendency to just sort of you know, this esoteric technological subject and we dissociate even when we're having these conversations. But it's like, guys, it's like we've been working in this industry for 12 years. The American government is having a dialogue this weekend about what to do about Bitcoin. El Salvador and the IMF are fighting about Bitcoin, right? Like this isn't a thing anymore where it's like we used to be in the office and it's 2015 and Vitalik decided to hard fork Ethereum and we all laughed because it was funny and the devs were kind of going crazy. Like this is a like, don't you feel like we're falling into a trap here? Like, you know, and this is like the dissociation from it. It's like this is like this is affecting the world, like on a global stage. Like these are two of the most important geopolitical clashes maybe going on right now in the entirety of the world. They're about Bitcoin and crypto, and then if we don't have some standpoint on them, like right, if we don't feel some like passionate about them in some way, you know, then who's going to answer these questions, right? I think El Salvador should be able to buy Bitcoin. I mean, maybe okay, you're giving them a loan, you know, maybe they have to impose conditions, but you know, some of those things is like the people of El Salvador should still be able to buy Bitcoin and use Bitcoin. I don't want to see those people lose those freedoms. You know, maybe it's fair from the government, but again, it's just sort of, you know, what year is this? That's the question. What year is this?
It's the year where Richard Hart gets his charges dropped from the SEC. It's the golden age of fraud. And I think Bukele is just doing a scofflaw thing where he's saying, "Oh yeah, IMF, yeah, I agree."
Did Bukele agree to these prohibitions?
Well, I don't know if it goes up to the executive branch. It looks like you delegate someone.
Well, did his government agree? Again, I'm not saying it's good or bad.
Like you're all about processes,
I
know.
Sometimes I do exist in a world of choices. I know. I do.
Richard Hart is free, guys. He's free.
Richard Hart being
but when are his live streams going to come back though? That's the real question.
Yeah. But like that's why I'm sort of asking. It's like, you know, it's like if we can't have an honest debate about like, you know, the countries are now considering this, and then us in the industry, it's like, you know, if we're confused about things. I don't know. I think
the Richard Hart thing threw me for a loop. Like I can defend a lot from Trump, okay, and I can even defend the Richard Hart thing because it's like maybe the SEC's day is over, right? And indeed, I have been predicting the SEC mostly an unconstitutional organ, the same kind of thing that we're talking about here. You know, I follow the Jarkissi versus SEC case very closely, which said more or less that you can't have a judiciary inside of an executive branch rule-making body. It makes sense to split them apart. If a lay judge can't understand SEC rules, the rules are overly complex. That's why we have the separation of powers in the United States system. I get why Richard Hart is out. At the same time,
I mean, like we should be able to say, like, you know, Richard Hart probably deserve, like, doesn't deserve to be out of that. You know, probably doesn't. You know?
He had a pretty awesome watch collection, though. You got to give him that.
Yeah, he does. Yeah, he looks great in a full-length Gucci suit. I'll credit where credit's due.
Now, if we can just get him and BitBoy in the next UFC fight, we're going to have an actual fight that everyone's going to want to see. There's going to be, I would pay to go see that.
But like, this is the thing. So McSweeney, I mean, it's like, don't you acknowledge that there's outright fraud and crime rampant in the crypto industry, right? There's sort of the VC layer where we know like how these new networks are getting created, where it's just, they're creating networks of things where there's imbalances, right? Like Bitcoin doesn't have these problems. Like Bitcoin doesn't have a problem where there's some foundation that owns an outsized percentage of it, where they're talking about managing or changing the money supply. It's like, don't we have to admit this is how you get to a situation where Richard Hart goes free? It's like our lack of being able to differentiate the stuff meaningfully contributes to a situation where there is no difference between Richard Hart and Roger Ver and Ross Ulbricht. And the thing is that ethically, morally, technologically, actually, there should be a difference. But like Richard Hart is not Roger Ver, is not Ross Ulbricht. These people are not the same. I do not think that, you know, I do not agree that they all need to be litigated in the same way. And I think, like, you know, the less we stand up for those conversations, I think the more it leads to this idea that everything is equal. It's all the same. You know, Fartcoin and Bitcoin. What's the difference between Fartcoin and Bitcoin? One of them, you know, has a funnier name. Is like, you know, if we don't push back,
I think in the eyes of 99% of people who touch them, there is no difference there. It's all narrative and memes at that point. I mean,
but that is not we know that that's not functionally true on the back end of these systems, right? Like, because, you know, I'll draw on the last news story here. Belarus is mining Bitcoin. They're going to take their excess energy and they're going to mine Bitcoin with it. That's what the president of Belarus is now working. Like, that's not happening with these other currencies that have no relationship
that we know about, that we're aware of.
but these currencies still have no relationship to the energy
And
market, right?
there's
There
very
is
little
no
incentive to do it. Like you're not getting Ethereum from mining anymore, right? That doesn't happen.
right. So like, with these nation states that have energy resources, like in El Salvador or in Belarus, it's like there is a relationship to that market. The governments mostly in most countries have a relationship to the energy market. They are functional in creating and standing up networks and grids using excess energy for Bitcoin, like in the case of Belarus, might make sense. But that again, this is just a differential, right? It's like that is different. Sure, Litecoin, Monero, like there are other is Monero proof of work. I don't remember anymore. Can't tell you. Okay.
I can't remember. I haven't
Like,
looked at that.
Quite a few of them.
Dogecoin
Barbecue
is proof of
coin.
work. Right? There are proof of work coins, right? But we know that like most of these other networks are not proof of work coins, right? So there are categorical differences. But like I feel like the less we have conversations about categorical differences, the more you end up with errors. Like these are the errors of things. You end up with a strategic reserve where you have XRP in there with Bitcoin, and it's like, can't we just admit that XRP and Bitcoin are different things? Like, can't we just admit Solana and Bitcoin are different things, even if we disagree about their functional utility? Like maybe there will be amazing things built on Solana that aren't pumped up fun, that aren't people live streaming, they're shooting of their goldfish with a gun. That maybe there's another thing to be built on Solana other than that. I don't know, but I know that thing is different than Bitcoin. Because I don't think that's possible with Bitcoin. You can't issue. Well, I mean, maybe you can.
I think you could. I think if you wanted to. I mean, I think that the history of these different networks, it's all about time scales, right? Like, I mean, you're gonna say that the first 5 years of Bitcoin weren't like wacky scam pothole filled like carnivals, because I mean they totally were. If you really wind it back,
but the network has to have certain properties, and so the network means like the code, the people running it, the rules by which you run it. That has to lead to a meaningful difference in these technologies, because there's second order effects. If you're Solana and you're having a conversation about changing the monetary policy, if you're Ethereum where you've changed the monetary policy, if you're a coin that where some plurality of people can change like an essential ingredient of the network, that isn't meaningfully different than Bitcoin where that can't happen.
I think you'll hate me for saying this, but these networks are mirrors of human behavior. They always have been. They always will be.
Yeah, that's true.
Which is why I will bring it back to my old comment, is that Bitcoin and certain other networks, they are some of the most powerful positive reinforcement engines ever created, but they exist in that form because they are mirrors. And so the design philosophies.
You could say the same thing about value broadly. Like people are entranced by value. Let's think of the movie Aladdin. The guy finds a beautiful lantern in the desert. People are entranced by value, but at the end of the day, as a value conduit, gold has different properties than some other illusory sort of thing, right? Like, so this is value versus like the actual thing in which value travels, right? There's some relationship there. So I'm just saying that can't we separate these things? Like, I agree with you that like the social operation of these, like Fartcoin is a social phenomenon. People who want to participate.
I mean, at the end of the day, they are.
Yeah, this is I.
And I know you disagree with that, and I respect your right.
Well, what is your argument that Bitcoin is purely a social phenomenon at this point?
That like we choose to ascribe value to it.
Yeah, it's a psychological commodity.
100%
for sure.
everything. I mean, it's
definitely
why do I treat the pieces of paper in my wallet?
But go back to that.
All of us choose to together, and like we don't speak. We don't.
Sure, but like, there's nothing other than your choice differentiating Fartcoin and Bitcoin. Like, it's just your choice to value Fartcoin and Bitcoin. That's the only thing. There's nothing else.
I think these things are different things to different people, and like your revulsion, maybe that's too strong, but your revulsion to some of these things is very different to somebody else. And I think the beauty of this technology is that like that choice is there.
No, because it misses that Fartcoin doesn't have a blockchain that's like, it doesn't run, it's not its own network. It's like a token on some other network. Like, it's not the back end of Fartcoin is different than the back end of Bitcoin. The back end of Bitcoin,
but why should the back end matter though? Like
because it gives the system different properties. Like there is a different, like if you know that like 3,000 times more than the Google servers, like amount of computers are backing Bitcoin that are functionally putting and are trading that technological expense for that item, then I think that item has more value than something where some idiot kid on pump.fun just taps the button and 30,000 fart coins come out and like he can always hit that button like that. These are two different things, and we have to be able to say that they're two different things. The, mm,
You remember what I was saying at the early part about, Bitcoin has this blue collar connection? Well, that's where the psychology becomes important. These are indeed psychological commodities. And you look at Trump
That's a
trying to
great
keep
term. That's
what
honestly a
it
wonderful
is.
term.
That's
Yeah.
what it is. Trying to keep these coalitions together, right? You saw, Trump did all these tariffs this week, right? On farming in particular. So right away you have this, he induced American farmers to produce more for the domestic population. Now, there's tons of libertarian-minded people in Bitcoin that don't want anything to do with tariffs. They want global free trade. At the same time, they're looking at and they're going, wow, we're going to get access to much cheaper food. I don't know the collective psychological state of all the coins in the world, but I know that resonates with Bitcoiners. I know a lot of Bitcoiners went, yeah. I know a lot of Bitcoiners are happy right now, for example, that seed oils are getting pushed out by major fast food chains across America. That a guy like RFK, who's put his whole wealth into Bitcoin. We heard about it in Nashville. All of his wealth is in Bitcoin. He's a 100% Bitcoiner now. You got this starting to take shape in America. All of this sort of strengthens the collective psychology of a lot of Bitcoiners. Bitcoiners continue to not be caught unawares by global turbulation and change. They're sort of steadfast as these things change very quickly around everyone else in the world. Everyone else is, so what's going on? Oh my God. A lot of Bitcoiners are like, it goes back to time
but that's
preference.
because the network has the property where they know that in the future that their personal ownership of the private keys can't be eroded by anyone, and that is a amount of confidence that you don't have when you buy a Fartcoin. Is that you don't know that you shouldn't have the same degree of confidence in the utility of those keys. Like if 10 years from now I don't think you're going to be able to exchange Fartcoin for a meaningful amount of goods and services.
Probably not. But I'm sure but the folks who are choosing to engage with Fartcoin, I mean, again, this goes back to our old idea of like the noble shitcoiner. Like it doesn't really exist. Like everyone, like I think these people know. I think these people know what they're getting into. And I mean, really, I think that's the beauty of it. Again, it's like these networks are mirrors for like behavioral and I'll throw another word in there, mythological preferences.
And you saw that this week. You saw Bitcoin decouple, not correlated with global equity crash this week. Bitcoin kept chugging along all week. That's a major diversion. When Bitcoin separates from normal US equities and behaves singularly and alone, and the rest of the market tanks, it starts to show something special. I saw, Marty Bent had this interview with that guy, Ian Carroll, who was on Joe Rogan today. So that's why he's on my mind. But that guy, Ian Carroll, in the interview with Marty Bent said, I love the Bitcoiners. They're so calm, right? They're so calm. I don't think the pump.fun guys, I go on pump.fun and I'm going to have an epileptic seizure.
They probably don't sleep and they probably don't eat a lot of red.
That's what I mean. We've been talking about that.
They're not very calm people.
You're if you're 15 minutes late, I saw I forget who it was, but he put out a whole big Twitter thread 2 weeks ago about how crypto has just collapsed into these 15-minute cycles and that everyone's exhausted.
Well, Dave Portnoy
Bitcoiners aren't exhausted.
The classic Portnoy quote is that he was a long-term holder. He held it for an hour and a half. And it's like, who could have expected him? But this is what I mean, is that these systems have different properties. And we have to be able to come to some sort of judgment. And this is the thing why Nolan and I love Pump.Fun is that when you have a system where people can create an infinite amount of monies and then use those monies to micro Ponzi each other's attention, this is the end of the Solana machine. Pump.Fun is the end of the line for the Solana machine. And that is what it creates. It is a product of that is how that system optimized for the maximum use case is, and this is where Coinbase and the Balajis, they love to talk about, the commodification of all assets, right? Internet attention, posts, social media posts, every website will have a token. And it's like, well, this is how the monetary aspect of that degrades. The monetary aspect of that degrades is if you are constantly worrying about where your money is. You think inflation is bad, you're losing 8% a year. In this crypto economy, it's like, you lose 100% in a day.
Well, I think what's fascinating is I think you have a very good point about what pump fun means. in like a bigger sense. I think it's honestly like very interesting, and I want to chew on that a bit somewhere privately. But I think there's definitely an interesting relationship between services like Pump.Fund, which thrive on attention and like perhaps increasingly shorter attention cycles, and just the general degradation of like human attention spans, and like where that ends at the end of this, I think hard to say. But again, I will go back to my frustrating comment of, yeah, I mean, these networks are mirrors, and I think like Pump.Fun is a mirror for like where our culture is right now, like our digital global internet culture.
But so is Bitcoin.
And I 100% agree, and I think that Bitcoin is a reflection of like a different kind of culture. But I asked that like you at least acknowledge that like what Bitcoin culture is today is sort of like not what it was out of the box. And like Bitcoin is a much older, and you could even say like mature network, and the community and the behaviors and the philosophies of those involved have evolved over the years that people have come
Sure.
and gone.
You can see, you know,
it's important to acknowledge, you know.
It is, and I use it as a predictive lens really for where Bitcoin's headed. I always see, you know, I use this model all the time when you look at professionals as they migrate into Bitcoin, and we've seen eras, and you can disagree which ones. You know, the cryptographers are the first. The Ron Paul 2012 campaign,
libertarians, yeah.
They were the sort of the next influx of people who left their careers. When you see professional people walk out of their career to enter Bitcoin, Wall Street came next, the unsentimental people. They were the first branch that joined Bitcoin that didn't really care about what the libertarians or the cypherpunks cared about. They wanted real risk. They wanted to make money and not exist in a bailout culture. But that added a lot to Bitcoin. Getting the guys who wanted it for real, not the fake stuff. Wild West. That was something that really attracted people. Like you listen to Arthur Hayes.
That's what drew us, right? I mean, we wouldn't be here if that draw was not there.
The meme people came next. The artists came next, right? The rare Pepes were next. You saw actual artists turn into Bitcoiners, and now we're seeing it hit sort of mainstream, where you are seeing firemen, and these people just want to do their job and have a savings vehicle. So
they don't want to be up all night wondering which of their Twitter posts they should invest their life in.
Yeah. They want, and that's where the time preference thing comes in, right? Because we shouldn't have had so much cognition put toward. That's what I've always said is wrong with crypto, right? Crypto presents itself as a consumer technology application. We've been lulled into this idea that consumer tech is everything. And Bitcoin is that Lindy effect. It's the first one where there is no iPhone 12 or 13 or 14 or 15 that's going to upend the whole market. We talked about Solana earlier. You know, one of the reasons I got involved in Solana is because I was sick of hearing Bitcoiners whine about Ethereum, just whining. They're right. They're all right in the end. But how do you deal with it? That's not how humans learn. I said, well, I can show Ethereum a thing or two. And I called up the guys at Solana. I said, let me produce an event for you during COVID. I said, if you go out and let the rich people come party with you, you're actually going to beat Ethereum. That's all you have to do. You have to be the iPhone 12. And if you're the iPhone 12 to their iPhone 11, you're actually going to kill them. I still claim I have made the most fatal blow on Ethereum in the world from just that one. I didn't whine about it. I didn't complain.
The substantive evidence.
Only I will give myself credit for it. No one else will understand it. I give myself credit for it. You guys were around. You remember me saying this stuff, but at least I've got you guys.
I remember you going to very expensive parties and being very.
Well, I did party. I did have.
I bet it was a great time in Lisbon. You know.
Oh, it sure was. We actually pinned the market. We pinned it, right? You know, we pinned it. So I was pretty proud about pinning the top of the 2021 market with that event.
This has been the news roundup for Supply Shock. You can get it wherever you get your podcast. Of course, like and subscribe on YouTube. We'll see you in New York next week, or coming up a couple weeks from now. Digital Asset Summits in New York City, the Blockworks event, convergence of Bitcoin folks, crypto folks. Going to be a lot of discussions. I'll be there. McSweeney will be there. Nolan will be there.
No, I won't.
Oh, well, okay.
I will not be there.
McSweeney also there in spirit. Appreciate you tuning in. We'll see you next week. For now, we'll be tuning out. See you later.
Thanks for having us.